When I say the most useless Star Trek starship, I am sure you'll have some ideas that come to mind.
Where you do find yourself asking, what were they thinking?
Today, we're going to talk about how to waste resources. The Oberth-Class Starship design.
Let's pause a moment and take a listen to the innate sounds of such a creature.
They're blooming wrong, you know. The Oberth-Class is actually probably the most misunderstood and maligned ships in the entire history of science fiction. And before all my fellow Trek fans go absolutely bananas and start lobbing comments at me and stuff to the contrary, hear me out, okay? So, when we first see the Oberth-Class, we see the USS Grissom orbiting the Genesis planet. It is set upon by a Klingon bird of prey and just dispatched with ease. Hardly an illustrious start. So let's look at the context of that, okay? So we've got a Federation science ship conducting a survey of a planet deep within the Federation. They're not really expecting anything to happen to them. They're well behind the lines. They're well away from the Klingon Empire. They're taking it easy. The ship was running with its shields down, as you would expect for a ship in friendly space. Also, it would have been beaming science teams to and from the planet and everything, and that would account for its shields being down. The crew would have been very relaxed about things at that point. Most of their sensor apparatus would have been pointed downwards at the planet to analyse it. What I'm saying is the last thing they would have been expecting would have been an assault from a cloaked vessel. The Klingon bird of prey decloaks and just dispatches it. It just gets it, just like the equivalent of running up behind it and slitting its throat. But that bird of prey would have been crewed up with a very competent crew for the type of mission it would have been dispatched on, to sneak into the Federation like that undetected with guile and stealth to conduct operations in that area. So that's why we see the Grissom dispatched so easily. The Grissom had a Starfleet crew on it. We see that on the bridge. The crew operating it were Starfleet, but it would have been full of scientists of all different fields. You would have had physicists on there and biologists studying the planet. So I think it's unfair for us, based on that alone, to tar the Grissom and by extent the Oberth-Class in general with that brush. So the next time we check in with the Oberth-Class, it's in the TNG episode The Naked Now. In that episode, the crew of the Oberth-Class Starship in that episode, the USS Tsiolkovsky, had actually all killed themselves. They'd all been infected with a virus and had all acted silly and done stupid things like turned the thermostat down and all frozen to death, or unlocked the airlock to the bridge and stuff like that and blown themselves into space. The ship itself wasn't destroyed. The USS Tsiolkovsky was destroyed when it was used to push the Enterprise out of jeopardy. It was in danger from a stellar fragment which was about to destroy both ships, a stellar fragment which would have destroyed the Enterprise D. So again, we cannot infer from that some inherent weakness within the Oberth-Class. And later on, we start seeing the Oberth-Class in different types of roles. We see them as transports, for instance, and we see them used as test beds for technologies that will later go on to be used on other Starship classes. Again, we see a destroyed Oberth-Class, which, to be honest with you, the fact that it sort of decloaked inside an asteroid and half of it was buried and had been left there for like 8 years or something, it was in pretty good shape. So what's going on? What is going on with the Oberth-Class? Why has it got such a bad reputation? Why do people always crack the same joke that it's made out of pure explodium? Why are they cracking wise about it on Star Trek Lower Decks all of a sudden? I don't like it. I've got a real soft spot for it. It was like the fourth different type of starship we saw in Star Trek canon. After the Excelsior class, we'd seen that at the beginning of The Search for Spock. The next one was a real treat in that film. We got to see 2 different new starship designs in that film. I think there's loads going on here. There's loads of fun to be had picking this apart and coming up with something that fits. And like I did with my Klingon Bird of Prey video, I think there's a terrestrial answer. There's an answer within our own history on Earth as to what the Oberth-Class is and what its mission is and what it does, where it fits in, why it was so ubiquitous, why did we see them everywhere, why was it in service so long? It was in service at least as long as the Klingon Bird of Prey was. It was in service at least as long as the Excelsior class and the Miranda class. I think from a production standpoint, I think it was just very practical to use it and keep reusing the model for it, because they had the model, ILM had built the model, and it was just cheap to just use it over and over again. And the same reason we have the Excelsior class and the Bird of Prey design. Star Trek was just great at recycling these designs and reusing them, and actually it kind of went a long way to sort of establishing the lore of Star Trek and the sort of universe it inhabits. As I mentioned a moment ago though, we do see the Excelsior class in different job roles, doing different things, from ferrying admirals to testing out new equipment to bringing the medical staff to Deep Space Nine, all sorts of things. Don't actually see them during the Dominion War actually. I've not actually seen one in any of the background shots of Deep Space Nine, which I am surprised about, because they went to the effort of just keep bashing up loads of Frankenstein's monsters for that. Looking at you, Jaeger class, I'm looking at you, Curry type, USS Shelley they used to call that one in the production office because it just looks so mental. So now I'm going to come to it. I'm going to say right here, right now, I think that the Oberth class is one of the most versatile and important little starships in the entire of Star Trek history. So let's start with a big one. Everybody cracks jokes about it being at the Battle of Sector 001 and at the Battle of Wall 359. That's cannon fodder. A starship made out of pure explodium, they say, that was sent in as an act of utter desperation. Let's rewind that and let's think about that in a bit more logical and rational terms. The Vulcans are part of the Federation, aren't they? They would see that as an act of gross illogic, wouldn't they? So what were they doing there? Why was Oberth-class ships fighting the Borg? What possible contribution could they make to it, apart from just to get the 85 souls on board killed horrifically or assimilated? I think the answer lies in a bit of the background dialogue from the Battle of Sector 001. And you hear somebody over a subspace transmitter saying that the Borg have broken through the first line of defence and they're coming to a second line. So we can infer from that Starfleet was lined up in lines of battle, ready to face off the Borg, with lessons they learnt from the Battle of Wall 359, hopefully. But again, Oberth-class was destroyed there, wasn't it? So I think we've got a real-world analogue for what's going on here. If you look at air forces around the world, they have dedicated electronic warfare platforms. The Americans have the famous AWACS aircraft and the Growler, or whatever it's called. Heck, even when SAC was operating, they had specialist electronic warfare versions of the B-52. So that's a clue there. I think one of the things the Oberth-class might have been doing in them 2 battles was electronic warfare. They've got that large sensor pod on them, that large massive suite of technology and information gathering stuff. They could possibly see stuff happening within the Borg cube with their advanced sensors, which other starship classes couldn't. And they could have fed that information back to Starfleet Command and back to the Admiral on the spot to help with decision making. The fact that they're destroyed says a lot. And I think that's answered in that line of dialogue where the Borg have broken through the lines. That Oberth-Class that was destroyed may have been tasked off with just hanging back a little bit on the second line, observing and gathering information and data and stuff. When the ball broke through so rapidly, it never had time to retreat, which leads me on to another point. It's how you use them, not what they are. They're not inherently flawed in their design, otherwise the design would have been scrapped. We see that later on in Star Trek, by the way. All of a sudden, the entire Starfleet has got tons and tons of brand new starships because the older starship designs just can't cut it. Star Trek exists in a post-scarcity society. I mean, the socio and economical ramifications of replication alone are just mind-boggling. So why would you cling on to a class of starship which was just inferior in every way to what was being operated by other local species? Now, yes, it could be argued that because of the way Star Trek history sort of works, you have that lost era between the films finishing and the Next Generation era starting, of like a golden age where it's all peaceful, and the Q warns them about this and tells them how unprepared they are and then introduces them to the Borg. That could have something to do with it, but I don't think so. I think the Oberth-Class was a very, very proven and sturdy platform for Starfleet. Now, Starfleet is primarily a peacekeeping organisation. It's not for war fighting, really, although it is prepared to go to war, and it is militaristic in its doctrine sometimes and how it is built and structured. But even really gung-ho officers like Captain Kirk, he can talk his way out of something before he fires off his phasers, whereas in actual fact, if you look at history and you look back at those old navies, most of the donkey work was being done by sloops and smaller type sailing ships, the types of ships that could get into small sort of coastal waters, shallows and things like that, and sail around like coral reefs and things. And that's what I can imagine the Oberth-Class doing. I can imagine it boldly going second where no one has gone before, but exploring in greater detail. And in terms of it being used for military purposes and being used in battles and everything, if you look at the fleet doctrine, again, of those Age of Sail navies, the big line of battleships would do the heavy fighting, the frigates would form a perimeter, and the brig sloops would carry messages and they would intercept escaping ships and all that kind of stuff. And when they weren't doing that, they was charting coastlines, they was on anti-slavery patrols, they was blockade running, they was intercepting privateers, all of the stuff that you can't send a big ship in to do. I think this translates quite well into the Star Trek universe. You've got your Miranda classes, I suppose, which would probably take the role of frigate or cruiser. And you've got your Constitution class again, which would be a slightly heavier frigate. And then you've got your larger Federation battleships, your Federation class ships in them days. And then later on in the Next Generation era, you had your Galaxy classes. And your Excelsior classes would then be your frigate type vessels. And your Oberth classes, they would be doing all of the little things that keep a spacefaring civilization moving. They would be escorting convoys, they would be handling privateers. And remember, a privateer in Star Trek time and history, they ain't going to be tooled up with like a massive Kvorcha class cruiser or something, or a Ferengi Marauder. We see these type of species and these type of criminals in Star Trek, and they're not really that tooled up. An Oberth-Class will be perfect for it. It will show the flag. You fire on me, I'm a Federation starship, you expect the wrath. You will feel the thunder, because a Galaxy class is just down the road. And what I mean by Starfleet officers cutting their teeth on these type of ships, that's where I think they'd be sent. They'd be posted to an Oberth-Class to learn what it means to be in Starfleet in reality. You get the image of the crew of the Enterprise in your mind, take that out of your mind and think of the crews of the other ships that do all the rest of the work. The day-to-day boring mundane stuff that happens in the Star Trek universe. Again, like I said, hunting down privateers is one of them, but going off and exploring an exploding star system is another bit of the work you're going to do. And again, in the real world, in real history, if you look up all of the greatest Royal Navy admirals and captains and Horatio Nelson types, they all started their careers on brig sloops of war. That's where they start. That's their first command, and they work their way up. Some of them don't even get the opportunity to command frigates and line of battleships. Look at Lord Cochrane. He had HMS Speedwell, or Speedy I think it was called. He used to joke that he'd carry his broadside around in his back pocket because he had 6 1 pounder guns or something. But he actually got more prize money than most other captains because he did what he did with wit and guile. And you've got to ask yourself the question, if you used to take a young Captain Kirk off of the Enterprise as his first command and give him an Oberth-Class, do you think that Oberth-Class would be made out of pure explodium? No, it wouldn't, because it's down to the crew. Even in other works of fiction, I'm, as I've said before, just catastrophically dyslexic, so I have to have my books in audio form. But I love listening to naval fiction books, like the Hornblower series for one, Ramage is another, Thomas Kidd is a new series, so it's been made for the past 15-20 years, but it's absolutely amazing. And they all start out, their first commands are always brig sloops, because that's where, as a commander in a navy, you learn. I also think another reason that the Oberth-Class has got such a bad name is our own perception of how Starfleet operates. But I honestly think the Oberth-Class is one of the most important and toughest and versatile starship classes that has ever been devised. And it pains me to say it, actually, by this stream of logic that I'm chucking out there, it also means that probably the Nova class is going forward one of the most important starship classes going as well. But I really do think that the Oberth-Class is an absolute thing of beauty. Now, I said on Twitter the other day, somebody posted a picture of the USS Pasteur, which was a future version of Beverly Crusher. It was her ship from All Good Things, the season finale, the end of Next Generation. And what I said was, that ship was entirely new, introduced right at the last minute of Star Trek Next Generation. And it looked wildly different to anything we'd seen from Starfleet before. But at the same time, the design language in Star Trek is so good and so instantly recognisable that you knew straight away that it was a Federation ship, and it conveyed its message of what it did, its mission type, just instantly. You knew just from looking at it that it was a Starfleet medical ship. And the Oberth-Class does that as well. When that first came on screen in The Search of Spock, it needed no introduction as a Federation ship. You just knew what it was. You knew it was a smaller, more vulnerable science vessel belonging to Starfleet. And that helped with the storytelling. That helped ratchet up the tension. You knew that these Klingons was out there, and you knew just from looking at the Oberth-Class that it wasn't really a match for this bigger cruiser type vessel. And that is something what Star Trek just does perfectly. And the Oberth-Class is a perfect example of that. So once again, before you all start lobbing comments at me and telling me I'm a wrong 'un and that I don't know what I'm talking about, you upstart YouTuber from South London and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to get off of you. As I always say, this is my personal view on the matter. Just bringing something different to the table, something different to think about with Star Trek. And I hope that I have rehabilitated the Oberth-Class for you. Let's give the Oberth a bit more love, because it is so useful and it is so beautiful. It does deserve it. It doesn't deserve its bad reputation. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment below, because it really does help the channel out. It helps me grow, and I want to grow this channel because I'm enjoying making these videos, especially the Star Trek ones. Actually, it's the decline of all British sci-fi, but I mostly talk about Star Trek because I love it.